Hi, I'm Dr. Shimanki. Nice meeting you all. I'm just going to share my talk here before we get started. There we go. Hopefully you all can see what I see. I see the talk up, so feel free to ask questions along the way. I have the chat open so that if you have any questions, just go ahead and ask, and I will make sure to answer them along the way. All right, so we're very fortunate to have partnered with Men Having Babies for many years now. And as you all know, Men Having Babies is an incredible service to all of you because they provide access to clinicians, to agencies, basically all the resources you need in order to grow your family the way you envision. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you today. It's incredibly important to me and to FSAC and my entire team to provide those services to you to help you grow your family. So we offer treatment to all patients, and in particular, we feel strongly about providing that care to men wanting to grow their families. But obviously, you're going to have a lot of choices, so just to cut to the chase, why choose me and why choose FSAC? And again, if you have any clinical questions along the way, please don't hesitate to ask questions. I will answer them, but just to speak specifically about me, I had a different route than most people. I was very fortunate growing up to have a parent that was actually a reproductive endocrinologist. And my father, Dr. Isa Shimanki, was one of the pioneers in reproductive medicine. He was the first fellow at UCLA back in the late 70s, and he was a solo practitioner. In fact, had an office with my mom as his nurse and office manager, and my aunt was his secretary, and basically it was literally a mom and pop shop helping patients grow their families for many, many years. And my father finally retired back in 2007. But as I was growing up, I would see him come home every day with a huge smile on his face because he was able to help yet another person or couple grow their family the way they wanted. And he was obviously incredibly rewarded doing so, and that rubbed off to me. Never once did he recommend I go to medicine or any of my siblings as well, but I was drawn to that field because of him. And in fact, when I went to medical school, I tried my hardest not to do what my dad did because I didn't want to copy what my dad did, but ultimately I found as I navigated through medical school and eventually chose OBGYN residency and navigated through that, I realized that the reason why I was attracted to medicine in general is I was drawn to reproductive medicine in specific. So right before my dad retired and right when I got back from finishing my fellowship on the East Coast, I trained at Cornell and then spent a year at a place called RMA, New Jersey, which is another huge center. I came back to UCLA to join faculty and had the opportunity to operate with my dad one last time before he retired, and that was a great memory of mine, and this is a picture of that. So we feel strongly that reproduction is for all people, and it's a reproductive right that everyone should have access to. So why FSAC in general? Let me just tell you briefly, when I was there from 2006 to 2014, and actually would never have left. When I joined, I basically restructured the program. I standardized some things, and within 1 year, we were able to double our pregnancy rates. And I was promoted to IVF director at a ripe young age back in the early 2000s, and would never have left. But the reason why I chose to join FSAC back in 2014 is that it was the one practice that I admired most in Southern California because I felt they not only offered great service and exceptional pricing, but my colleagues are ethical, great people, and I felt that it was a fantastic place to join and to help grow my practice and offer the very best to my patients. And so let's just talk briefly about the outstanding service. We have an unbelievable staff across the board, catering to any person that walks into the door. We have the right staff in place to help everyone through their journey to achieve the family, hopefully, of their dreams. Specific to third party, we have a 10-member team that's dedicated solely to donor egg and surrogacy, both locally and internationally. And I know the international market is dried up temporarily, but luckily we've remained a robust practice because we were ready to treat all patients and have always been doing so from the very beginning. So we were very busy and will remain very busy despite the pandemic because people want to have babies and continue to come to our practice in order to do so. Luckily, we have multiple locations, so we have great access to people all throughout Los Angeles. We're ideally located throughout many significant big cities in Southern California, in particular Thousand Oaks, the Valley, Encino, and the West Side in Santa Monica. And so we have access to patients from many parts of Los Angeles and in easy access to airports that can fly in both to LAX as well as to Burbank Airport in case you have, for example, a surrogate or a donor that's flying in. They can come directly to our any one of our 3 offices rather conveniently. Our outcomes are absolutely exceptional. And don't take my word for it. I'll give you some information that will help you make the decision that makes the best choice for you, whether it's our clinic or elsewhere. But as long as you've done your homework and looked into our outcomes, that's incredibly important to us. If you ultimately end up in our door, we've known you've done your homework. So these are our statistics through the Society of American Reproductive Technology. Now, SART is an unbiased agency that collects data, reporting data from clinics around the country. Not everyone reports to SART, but I would argue that every clinic should report to SART because SART aims to create a transparent way of reporting your data. If you report to SART, they ask you to report your data prospectively, meaning when you start a cycle for a patient, you have to report it before the outcome is known. And that way it prevents clinics from backtracking and reading out information that wasn't evident at the beginning. In other words, let's say an outcome doesn't work and you could sweep it under the rug. You can't do that with SART the way it's designed over the last 3-4 years. It allows you to report all your data, whether good or bad. And that's incredibly important to me because it's important to have transparency through the process. And it's also important to know how you do, not just for men using an egg donor, which is an excellent prognosis, and a surrogate, which is an excellent prognosis, but for all patients across the board that are coming in for fertility treatments, because it gives you a much better representation of the overall quality of the center. If you look at our data, feel free to compare us to any place in the entire country. You'll see we compare quite favorably in terms of our outcomes. And again, it's reported prospectively, so it's transparent. And that was for 2018, and you'll see that it's very consistent throughout the years. 2019, we did extremely well, especially compared to the vast majority of clinics in the country. So we feel that we maximize outcome, but we also do so by minimizing risk. And how do we minimize risk? We aim, as should any clinic nowadays, aim to minimize risk by transferring 1 embryo at a time, and we do that for the vast majority of patients. So our average number of embryos transferred is less than 1.1 embryos. And basically, it's far less so for people using an egg donor because almost everyone using an egg donor ends up with 1 embryo transferred, unless, despite our strong discussion about avoiding risk, they're twisting our arm to put 2 in. We'll put 2 in, but it goes with caution. We really do strongly advise 1 embryo at a time, 1 baby at a time to provide the healthiest outcome. Let's see. It appears as though we're going to go over SART statistics and how to interpret data. You're going to undergo that, and you're going to have that information access a little bit later in the program. So feel free to join that session. But if you have any specific questions, you can always email me as well. I'll provide my email at the end of the session. So it's important to know that, and this should be true for any clinic, and these are all reputable clinics that are part of men having babies, but virtually all men using an egg donor and surrogate will have success. It's important to know, though, it's not 100% because medicine is humbling. There's no absolute scenario. So there's going to be the occasional outlier, and that's why it's so important that no matter what happens, you choose a center and agencies, if you go through an agency that you trust completely as they navigate this sometimes potentially complicated process for you. But the vast majority of you, thankfully, will have great success with this process. So what makes us stand out relative to all the other centers out there? Because again, there are many excellent centers that are out there, and so why choose us specifically? Again, we as a team are leaders amongst our peers in reproductive medicine. So how so? Well, we're elected to leadership roles. And again, I was IVF director at UCLA at a very young age. I was just out of fellowship, and I was probably the youngest IVF director in the country at the time. Then I joined FSAC, and soon after that, again, I was elected to the board of the Pacific Coast Reproductive Society. And I was elected president back in 2019. My stint began, and it was actually supposed to end April 21st, 2020, but thanks to COVID, we actually canceled our 2020 conference and just finished our recent virtual conference for Pacific Coast Reproductive Society, considered amongst the very best conferences in the world in reproductive medicine. And I literally just finished my stint as president, and now I'm immediate past president for this. This is an important conference. But not only are we in leadership roles, but we also continue to provide innovative research in reproductive medicine. This is actually an image from one of the papers, one of the landmark papers that I was very fortunate to publish in the largest fertility journal in the world, Fertility and Sterility. We'll get to that in a second. These are just our most recent publications, specifically my most recent publications over the last few years, and I have well over that as well. And specifically, one of the landmark papers in the image that you just seen was a proof of concept study that I published back in 2016 on the ability to potentially do pre-implantation genetic screening without actually biopsying an embryo by collecting the fluid surrounding the embryo, the spent media, and testing that. I was able to show, and our team was able to show, that you can actually get a diagnosis by using the DNA surrounding an embryo. And now, ever since this paper, there have been numerous papers written on this, and of course citing us as the lead paper on this. And basically, now companies are starting to offer this as a potential service. I would still argue caution until there's more data on this, but it's coming more and more as a possibility to potentially non-invasively screen embryos as opposed to doing a biopsy. So just to summarize, we have exceptional pricing, and we do participate in both GPAP-1 and GPAP-2. So again, we want to be there for our patients in every way possible. And we also waive our consultation for any participant from men having babies. And we can do that consultation whether in person, over the phone, or in video, whatever you feel most comfortable during this pandemic. Hopefully we're gonna hit herd immunity soon as people get vaccinated at a higher rate, but until we're there, feel free to, and even after, to meet with me virtually for your consultation or your follow-up appointments. But again, please do your research. I invite you to go to SART.org, to fertilityiq.com. You'll see that we are very well reviewed as well on there. It's a fertility service specifically looking at fertility doctors and reviews on their outcomes and on their service to patients. And feel free to email me anytime. Here's my email, drshamanki@fertilityassociates.com. And we invite any email you'd like. And of course, feel free to check out our website, fertilityassociates.com, if you'd like to learn more information. So here are the numbers of, or the information of interest, fertilityassociates.com, our toll-free number, and of course, we have multiple offices. Feel free to reach out anytime. So I'm going to now see what questions there are available, and feel free to ask as many questions as you like. I'm happy to answer them. There's a couple of statements. One is thanks, and another is it's like rocket science. And it really is. It's pretty amazing, actually, what we can do nowadays. But it isn't rocket science, thankfully. We are able to do great work thanks to all the building blocks that have been built through the years over research. And it's pretty amazing what we can do nowadays. Here's a question that just got asked. Is there a risk for the newborn flying shortly after being born, i.e. the gestation carrier lives far away from the IP's home state? And the answer is, there's risk to anything in life. I mean, when you walk out the door, when you get into a car, there's potential risk. But thankfully, the overall risk is relatively low. Remember that the surrogate is going to pass on antibodies to that newborn that from her immunity that she's developed over her years. Those antibodies get passed through the placenta to the newborn. And so that baby is going to have additional immunity or an additional immunity boost at birth that will protect that baby from most things. Now, granted, there are some crazy things out there. We never knew we'd have a pandemic. We never knew that COVID would exist. And that was a novel virus. But basically the majority of viruses people have been exposed to them and therefore have antibodies towards them. So in general, the answer is it's safe. However, there's always that tiny risk someone's sick on the plane and can potentially infect the baby, assuming that the baby does not harbor antibodies that they've obtained from the gestational carrier. Overall, thankfully, it's very safe. And so if that's your only means of getting your baby home, I would rest assured that the vast majority of the time it's going to be perfectly fine to do so. Any other questions? Let me just see if the Q&A. What are your thoughts on multiples? Here's another question. I'm a big proponent of one baby at a time, and I know this can be an extremely expensive process for you. So the thought of completing your family, assuming you want 2 children, by putting 2 in at a time is seems appealing. And thankfully, if that were to happen, the majority of the time it's going to be okay. But we don't know, looking at a surrogate, when it's going to be okay. And even if a surrogate had a good outcome with twins prior, that doesn't guarantee that the outcome is going to be good again. And so the best way to minimize risk is to put 1 embryo at a time. Yes, the live birth rate is going to be a little bit lower than putting 2 embryos in at a time. But remember that when you put 1 embryo in, sometimes that embryo splits into 2. And so sometimes when you put 2 embryos in, they can split into 3. And during my fellowship, I even saw it split into 4. So 2 embryos split into 4. I've seen 1 embryo split into 3. So there's some pretty crazy things that happen even when you're putting 1 embryo in. So you can imagine when you put 2 in, there's a chance of a bad outcome in that more than 1 implants. And in fact, sometimes more than 2 implant. And then you're faced with an important decision. Do you selectively reduce down to 1 or 2? And with that, there's risk as well. But even when there's 2 separate gestational sacs that are implanted and the surrogates had an uneventful past, there are still chances that it may not go well. And the earlier a baby's delivered, the greater risk to that baby.